Good afternoon, classmates. Arvin and myself, Glenda, is here to present as Group 1 called Tala.
The topic our group is going to present is about work motivation.
For our outline, we will be discussing the following: background of work motivation, history of work motivation, function, importance, and benefits of work motivation, simple ways to increase motivation in workplace, disadvantage of work motivation, learning, and takeaway.
So let us first discuss some background. What is motivation? People often equate unmotivated people with being lazy. Do you really think this is true? For instance, consider a student that gets poor grade in history. He's not interested in textbooks, doesn't want to read. Yes, he's intelligent, but he doesn't do the reading needed to get high grades. You might say this student is unmotivated about reading or say that he's lazy. But when the latest comic book in his favorite series comes out, he's the first in line to purchase it. And he reads it from cover to cover the first chance he gets and then a couple of times more before he finally puts it down. He's memorized lines, carefully considered the storyline, and even message friends speculating where he thinks the story might be going. If we are going to compare these two activities of reading, we can say that the student is not lazy in reading books. Motivation results when an individual interacts with the situation. It's a state of mind where the individual determines the level of desire, interest, and energy that will translate into action. Basically, motivation is a combination of intensity, direction, and persistence of effort. Now, let's take motivation into the workplace. Motivation is important to managers because it leads to action and is one of the three key elements of performance. More importantly, it's a variable that can be influenced because motivation is not a stable state of mind. Managers who can influence motivation can increase performance. We already understand that motivation is very individual, and what motivates one worker will not necessarily motivate another. When a manager adds workplace components like job design and work environment, and organizational components such as company culture and workplace politics, it becomes even more challenging to understand how to motivate an employee to produce. Let us also discuss some significant historical studies that led to the evolution of work motivation. Over the past centuries, human motivation has been studied, analyzed, and discussed by reputable and famous scholars, philosophers, and psychologists. Some of them are Plato, Sigmund Freud, Alfred Adler, Erik Erikson, Carl Rogers, B.F. Skinner. Above all of these famous distinctive psychologists, Abraham Maslow is one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century. His biggest contributions were his humanistic psychology as well as his development of the hierarchy of needs. During the post-Maslow days, people started realizing the importance of influencing workers to accomplish tasks for an organization. The oldest technique used to motivate others is known today as the carrot and stick method. The name evolved from the stubbornness of donkeys that could only be moved by taunting them with a carrot. Early managers regularly offered economic carrots to entice people to work harder. This technique was passed on from generations to generations and was a deeply rooted part of society for hundreds of years. This theory created a misconception that money always motivated a person to work harder. More often, managers were beginning to realize that the methods of the past were not effective. The awakening field of psychology was looking for newer ways to motivate people, and in a short time, managers would begin seeking help from psychologists to understand new methods of management. Historical views of motivation. Several theories, methods, visions, views, and learnings has arisen and eventually evolved adapting to the developing environment we're living in. Evolution can be traced from scientific management through the human relations movement to the human resource approach. Scientific approach. The assumptions of scientific management were that work is inherently unpleasant for most people and the money that they earn is more important to employees than the nature of the job they are performing. In the 1880s, Frederick Taylor advocated two ideas that hardly seem special today but were quite new 85 years ago. First, he recommended that the employees be carefully selected and trained to perform their job. Second, he believed that increasing workers' wages would raise their motivation and make them more productive. It was contributions like this that stimulated further studies of behavior in organizations and created an intellectual climate that eventually paved the way historically perspectives for the development of the field of organizational behavior. Human relations movement. This school of thought emphasized that the role of a social processes in organizations and assumed that the need for belongingness and the need to feel useful are more important than money in motivating employees. The researchers concluded that the attention paid to the employees was more of a contributing factor to their productivity level. Work satisfaction depended to a large extent on the informal social pattern of the work group. It was concluded that people's work performance is dependent on both social issues and job content. As a result of these researches, it was evident that employees should be treated in a humane way.